Hello, and welcome to Pugs, Tea, and the Paranormal, or welcome back. I'm Leah, and of course I'm here with my cute little co-hosts. This is Dexter, and this is Pootie Bear. He's got his little piggy toy. He's having a great time. It's cute. Right before I started filming, I noticed that I'm pretty sure the pugs are kind of getting used to the routine, because this is the fourth time that I've filmed a video now. So they kind of just sit here and wait for me. It's cute. I think they're getting used to it. Anyway, I have just a big cup of Earl Grey. Black tea with honey is my favorite thing. It's so comforting, so good. And then I have a cup of ginger peach turmeric. So we are going to be talking about Skinwalker Ranch today. And of course I'm going to be telling you about skinwalkers themselves. And today's video is going to be really interesting. This is a topic that I've wanted to research for a really long time, and I've learned that a lot of information out there is pretty inaccurate or obviously sensationalized for views, like particularly on TikTok. And I'm really going to do my best today to represent this topic with respect and as much accuracy as I possibly can. So get yourself cozy, grab a pug or an animal, grab yourself a cup of tea, and let's get into today's video. It's way too hot still. So skinwalkers are deeply rooted in Navajo culture and beliefs, and the Navajo are very secret about skinwalkers due to their inherent danger and respect for the supernatural. These beings are considered powerful and very dangerous, and open discussion is actually believed to disrespect them and even potentially attract their attention. I gotta say, this stuff was so fascinating, but very, very spooky. It gave me chills. Skinwalkers are considered malevolent entities capable of harming individuals and harming communities. Sharing details about how one becomes a skinwalker is very taboo, as it could empower others to engage in these harmful practices. Therefore, it's thought that this secrecy is a form of protection for communities and for people who are vulnerable to such dark influences. And the more you learn about it, the more sense it makes. So Skinwalker Ranch is a 512-acre property located in Utah that has gained notoriety for its alleged history of paranormal and UFO-related activity. Over the years, there have been numerous reports of bizarre occurrences on this ranch, including UFO sightings, paranormal activity, and animal mutilations. So to start with the most obvious, what exactly is a skinwalker? Because I thought I knew, but I was very, very wrong. According to Navajo beliefs, a skinwalker, also called a Yinaldalushi, I know I mispronounced that, but I tried, is a harmful witch, perhaps best known for their ability to shapeshift into animals. They will often take the form of a wolf, coyote, or a deer. And a word of warning, while this is definitely one of the most fascinating topics that I have ever learned about, this one gets pretty dark. Okay? So the concept of skinwalkers originates within the Navajo Nation, and Navajo folklore warns against even mentioning the word skinwalker, fearing that it might attract their attention. These terrifying beings originated from humans, specifically medicine men or shamans who attained incredible spiritual power for good, but they chose to instead embrace darkness. Despite achieving enlightenment, they inexplicably turned to evil, forsaking their path of good. Historically, traditional healers within the Navajo community would undertake pilgrimages to the 4 sacred mountains that encompass the Navajo Nation. There are 2 in Colorado, 1 in Arizona, and then 1 in New Mexico. And here, they would perform healing and other essential ceremonies on patients in these areas. Traditionally, these healers required the ability to travel swiftly between the mountains surrounding this territory. But obviously, those journeys were very long and very tiresome. Now, to accomplish this within a shorter time frame, spiritual guides imparted the knowledge of shapeshifting, allowing them to transform into animals such as deer, coyotes, wolves, and even hawks. This unique ability facilitated rapid travel, enabling them to conduct vital healing ceremonies for their patients while adhering to ancient sacred practices. However, the mastery of shapeshifting was a highly challenging undertaking. Acquiring this ability required years of dedicated study involving rigorous training, intricate ceremonies, and the memorization of very complex songs and writings. Some individuals, frustrated by how time-consuming this was, wished for a quicker and an easier method. And it was this desire that attracted the attention of malevolent forces. These entities offered a shortcut, promising to grant the ability to shapeshift rapidly. However, this power would come at a significant cost, requiring the individual to engage in very dark and very harmful practices. This path to rapid shapeshifting, as offered by the malevolent spirits, demanded a horrific sacrifice, the life of a beloved family member. And from what I understand, this act had to be committed against someone that they cherished and deeply loved. And it served as the first and one of the most crucial steps in acquiring this dark power. So clearly, like skinwalkers who chose this faster and easier route, they were already evil people, like before they even began to learn the practices. So once again though, here is where the secretness of these beings come into play. Because if you research skinwalkers online, you'll see that one of the steps to becoming one is the sacrificing of a loved one. But the explanations pretty much stop there. Like nothing that I could find really goes any further into the other rituals that are required, other than mastering the use of dark magic and then casting curses to harm other people. But there's really not much detail on any of it. And from what I understand, the path of acquiring that dark power, it is so deeply disturbing and morally reprehensible that it is simply not spoken about. But upon completing these tasks, the person gains the ability to shapeshift. But of course, it's at the terrible cost of aligning themselves with these horrible dark forces. I told you it was dark, but it's like you can't deny how fascinating this stuff is. Now, the full transformation into animal form is said to be very complex. The skinwalker must first kill the animal, then meticulously remove its skin, and then meticulously apply the animal's original markings and designs to it. And this process often involves intricate ceremonial practices to prepare the animal's skin for use in the shapeshifting ritual. And when they have fully transformed themselves into the animal, it will be significantly larger than the natural species could ever be. Common animal forms adopted by skinwalkers traditionally include the coyote, the buck, the deer, and then the wolf, as well as some birds. And this was because there was simply such an abundance of them in this region. And interestingly, if you see like a TikTok or something where somebody is claiming that a bear or a mountain lion is a skinwalker because it looks weird, according to Navajo beliefs, that's very unlikely, as bears and mountain lions are considered sacred, and they can rarely be affected by evil forces that are necessary to use their skins in these dark practices, which I think is very, very cool. But one thing that social media does get right is the phenomenon of people hearing their own voices from a distance, like usually in the woods. And that is widely acknowledged within Navajo tradition. And skinwalkers do indeed yearly mimic voices to try and draw people out to them. Oh, I find that so creepy. Skinwalkers are also said to use weapons, but they are typically derived from natural elements, which are usually stolen from graveyards. Apparently, they collect bones from cemeteries, and with them, they craft weapons such as knives and darts. Additionally, they grind the bones into a fine powder, which is believed to possess paralyzing properties. Inhaling this bone dust can induce a curse that is so strong that one could die unless it is quickly counteracted with a ceremonial intervention. The next bit is pretty gross, so fair warning. They will apparently sometimes even use decaying flesh found in the cemetery, and they'll use it as a potent poison to inflict illness upon their victims. I don't know how I didn't connect like how evil and disturbing a skinwalker would be. I had no idea. I really had no idea what they even were before I started researching this. I thought they were just someone who changed into an animal and ran around the forest, but I was very, very wrong. So now let's get back to Skinwalker Ranch. So Professor Junior Hicks, who is a scientist at the University of Utah, basically pioneered the investigation of paranormal activity on this very famous piece of land. It all started in 1951 when 30 of his students witnessed a cigar-shaped craft flying directly over them in the middle of the day. Hicks then began his own research, uncovering numerous accounts of UFO sightings and other strange events in this area, and he discovered that all of these spooky encounters shared one common denominator: the skinwalker. He then went and spoke directly to local Native American tribes, and he learned that they considered this entire region surrounding the ranch to be a very dangerous and forbidden area, which they referred to as the path of the skinwalker, and refused to venture anywhere near it. Traditional beliefs within the Ute culture, I hope I say that right, held by the tribe that has been in this area for generations, hold that this area is associated with the presence of the supernatural as well as other dark energies. Throughout the years, residents of this area reported thousands of accounts of UFO sightings, as well as cattle mutilations, strange animals, skinwalkers, and other worldly beings. Kenneth and Edith Myers were the recorded landowners of this ranch in 1933. Following their deaths, Kenneth's brother Garth and his sisters sold the ranch to Terry and Gwen Sherman. This family had 2 young children, and they were experienced cattle ranchers, so the 512-acre property seemed like the perfect place to raise their family and make a living. However, their residence on the property was very brief, lasting less than 2 years, and this was due to the unsettling events that they encountered there. It was after their departure that the ranch gained notoriety when a paranormal research group began investigating the property, marking the beginning of its infamous reputation. Shortly after the Shermans moved in, he's sound asleep, his little head is falling. So shortly after the Shermans moved in, strange occurrences began. And these ranged from potential skinwalker sightings, UFOs, flying vehicles, which I guess is a UFO, of course, bizarre lights and electrical disturbances, bizarre creatures, including ones that resembled Sasquatch. Can't wait to tell you about those. Cattle mutilations, and even what was believed to be portals to another dimension. I should just mention right now that as a Canadian, I have a slight obsession with Bigfoot. Or what do you guys call it? I call it Bigfoot. I don't know if it's interchangeable, but I definitely grew up being very afraid of the woods, thinking that I would run into a Bigfoot one day. I'm gonna do a video on that very soon. So one of the first things that the Shermans noticed was what they actually found inside the ranch house when they moved in. And they found that the Myers had installed numerous locks and deadbolts on windows, on the insides and outsides of doors, but also on closets, kitchen cabinets, as well as heavy metal bars across the windows. And this led many to believe that the Myers were well aware of something evil on their property, and they were simply trying to keep it out. And that definitely made me think about the movie Signs, when he locked an alien in his kitchen cabinet. No, in the pantry. He locked an alien in the pantry. That movie scarred me for the rest of my life. So the first scary event for the Shermans had to do with some sort of otherworldly animal. And this was when they encountered a giant wolf on their property. While working on the farm one day, Terry spotted some sort of dog at the far end of the yard. And at first, he couldn't quite tell if it was a regular dog, coyote, or a wolf. All he knew was that this thing was huge. So he very quickly guessed that it was a wolf. But before he could even really process how big this thing was, it already had run across his yard, and then it simply stood in front of him and his family. It was very weird because it was a wild animal. It was obviously a wolf, but it was larger than any he had ever seen. It was larger than any natural wolf could have possibly been. And wolves are already pretty huge, so that would be pretty scary. It apparently came up to Terry's chest, who was 6 feet tall, and the animal was very calm, and it just stood there in front of him, and he actually reached out and pet it. But as soon as he touched it, it turned and unexpectedly ran towards a nearby holding pen where it targeted a calf who had gotten too close to the bars. And it grabbed onto the poor calf's neck and then attempted to actually drag it through the bars. Terry attempted to deter it with his fists and then a baseball bat, but the wolf remained fixated on the calf. As a last resort, his son retrieved a handgun. However, multiple shots had no visible effect on this wolf, with no blood or apparent wounds appearing despite the hits. Like, it was truly like this thing was bulletproof. Finally, a 4th shot forced the wolf to release the calf, but it remained unfazed by the gunfire, simply staring at Terry calmly. Concerned about his family and livestock, Terry then went and grabbed his shotgun and he hit the wolf 2 times, once in the shoulder and then once in the chest from about 40 feet away. This time, with the more powerful weapon, Terry could hear the bullets hit the wolf, and there was now clear signs of injury with some flesh even coming off. But the wolf still showed no signs of pain, no distress, and it simply calmly walked away towards the tree line. Now very worried about the safety of his family and his livestock if this thing was running around his farm, Terry and his son followed its distinct tracks into the woods with the intention of finishing it. They followed the tracks for about a mile, where suddenly they abruptly ended. The muddy tracks literally came to a dead end, leaving them baffled and deeply unsettled. Somehow, it seemed, the giant wolf had disappeared into thin air. I've only seen a wolf one time in my life, and it was I was at Grouse Mountain at the Wolf Preserve. Pretty magical experience when you get to see one. Okay, shortly after, Gwen encountered a creature that she believed to be the same wolf. While driving towards the ranch house, a massive canine suddenly appeared alongside her vehicle. Now, despite driving at a speed that no ordinary wolf or any animal really could maintain, the animal effortlessly kept pace before veering off in a different direction. They would see several more sightings of these large wolves over the coming months. The next strange thing that they noted was that heavy farm equipment, sometimes exceeding 100 pounds, would just mysteriously disappear. They would walk away for a couple of minutes, come back, and it would be gone. And these incidents, though seemingly playful at first, actually disrupted daily life on the farm. For example, a 70-pound post digger just up and vanished one day, and then it suddenly reappeared hanging from a tree. Pretty weird. The next series of events were definitely not playful though by any standard, and they involved the family witnessing mysterious vehicles, lights, and even flying spacecraft over their property. On the first occasion, Terry, his son, and his nephew were surveying a remote part of the property at dusk one night, and as they're finishing up, they notice a set of lights off in the distance. There's white headlights and red tail lights. They immediately assume that it's an RV that is parked on their property, and the occupants were probably camping there for the night. And that wasn't an uncommon thing given how big their property was. Like, perhaps these people just didn't know that they were on private property, but they were trespassing and Terry wanted them gone. So he and the boys start approaching the RV on foot to speak with the driver. Strangely though, as soon as they start walking towards it, the vehicle starts backing away from them. And the reason that this was strange was because the direction that they were coming from and the fact that it was dark out, the driver should not have been able to see them approaching. Now, annoyed with the trespasser, Terry and the boys start running towards them to demand that they leave the property. But shockingly, the RV's headlights clearly lifted off the ground and they land just a little ways away. So now just like a little tiny bit scared, It was here that they realized that this RV was not even making any sound. It was completely silent, and they weren't even hearing any tire sounds rolling over the dirt, which was even stranger. However, Terry knew that this vehicle had just backed up into a barbed wire fence on the property, so it was now cornered. He began sprinting towards the RV, and frighteningly, the vehicle lifted off the ground, hovered, and then it flew away over the tree line. It was clearly not an RV. In fact, it actually looked like a giant refrigerator when they got a good look at it in the air. So weeks later, Terry and Gwen witnessed a similar event. They were walking on their property one night when they hear this loud metallic scraping sound, and it's nothing that they can place. Then, in the opposite direction and off in the distance, they see a set of vehicle lights. They approached, again wondering if somebody needed help or wondering if they needed to get rid of more trespassers, only to see the vehicle rise, hover, and then relocate a short distance away. They try approaching several more times, but the vehicle gently flies and moves every time they draw near. This bizarre behavior suggested a deliberate game, as if someone or something was toying with them. They then hear the loud metallic sound again. They look in the direction that it's coming from, and when they look back, the vehicle or the craft had completely disappeared. Many sources say that this could have been an aircraft called the Tacit Blue, which was widely described as actually looking like a flying refrigerator. But others argue that at the same time of this sighting, this aircraft was still highly classified. So it's unlikely that it would land not once, but twice on this property where it had already been seen by civilians. So the perfect temperature. So that winter, Terry was checking on his cattle on a really cold, really snowy day, and he observed a large, silent craft which was hovering low in a nearby field. These bright, rainbow-colored spotlights were emanating from beneath this craft, and it looked like it was scanning the ground, almost like some sort of searchlight. And the craft's slow, deliberate movement suggested some sort of search was going on. Now, while observing this craft from a concealed position in the quiet, snow-covered field, Terry was pretty uncomfortable, and he cautiously shifted his body and he went to stretch his neck. And this resulted in the popping sound of his neck vertebrae cracking, and this was immediately followed by the craft extinguishing all of the spotlights. And it really seemed to him like the craft or its operator had detected this subtle sound. It then turned towards him and then slowly departed in the opposite direction. And that would not be the last sighting of this particular craft. But before that one, there's a pretty fascinating theory related to this searchlight craft. So the Uinta Basin is an area renowned for its rare minerals, including one called gilsonite. Gilsonite is a naturally occurring hydrocarbon resin, and it's highly valued in industries like oil and gas, construction, and manufacturing. And the land surrounding Skinwalker Ranch sits atop one of the world's few significant gilsonite deposits. And you have to wonder if this craft was possibly searching for this mineral or maybe another one. You never know. Also in connection with this, interestingly, the Myers, they had put a clause in the contract when they sold the ranch to the Shermans. And they said that if the Shermans wanted to dig anywhere on the property, they would have to first contact the Myers family and get permission to do so. Now, a lot of people quickly just say, well, it's because they wanted the rights to any mineral deposits, but maybe it's because of something else. In connection to the more mysterious side of it, Kenneth Myers had apparently told a neighbor that he never dug on the ranch because, quote, bad things happened when you dig there, unquote. And if you watch the show, The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, they're very weird about digging. I don't know why. Several weeks later, Terry was away for work, and Gwen experienced what she believes was the same search craft or whatever it was called. Driving home, she initially mistook a large object overhead for a dark cloud, but she soon realized that it was actually some sort of massive ship. Fearful, she accelerated, only to find the ship activate the same rainbow-colored spotlight that Terry had witnessed. The beam followed her vehicle down the road, illuminating her until she finally reached the driveway. She was terrified, but thankfully it flew over their house, it ascended above the tree line, and it disappeared. However, that relief was short-lived, because later that night, Gwen observed 2 bright headlights, which she first thought was an RV, trespassing on the property. But this time, the vehicle was actually parked close enough to the ranch house that she was able to see inside of it from her window. And she said that the interior was brightly lit, and it revealed a large desk on the inside, and there was a figure sitting there. This figure rose, and he stood in what she said was a light-filled doorway, and she could clearly see that this figure was wearing a black helmet. They were wearing knee-high boots and some sort of uniform, and they were exceptionally tall, perhaps even 7 feet. And though they were wearing a helmet, Gwen knew that this figure was staring right at her, and she got an intense feeling of dread from it. She immediately closed the curtains, and she called Terry and begged him to come home. But before he could arrive, the vehicle vanished as abruptly as it had appeared. Now, Terry and Gwen went and investigated where the vehicle had been parked, and they found unusually large footprints. I don't like that one. So one of the most fascinating phenomena was when the Shermans began seeing a strange orange cloud appear in the exact same spot on their property every single night. This unusual orange streak would appear in the sky above one specific tree grove. Now, they initially thought that it was just from the setting sun because of the color, but they thought that it was strange that it would always appear in the exact same spot, and its shape would also slightly change. Sometimes it would appear more oblong, and then sometimes it would be completely round. One night, Terry used his rifle's night vision scope to take a closer look, and he made a pretty startling discovery. The orange streak was not a cloud, and it was not a trick of the light. It was a portal. Through the scope, he witnessed a second sky, like a brightly lit blue expanse, seemingly opening from our dark night sky. And he said this appeared to be a portal or some sort of doorway to another dimension, another world. Over several nights, Terry observed large black triangular crafts emerging from this portal, from the second sky. And notably, the portal itself was incredibly narrow, visible only from Terry's specific vantage point, and only when he was looking straight on at it. Like if he tried to find it from somewhere else on his property, he couldn't. It had to be from that exact spot. And they said that anybody driving around the area or anywhere to the sides of it would have only seen like a slightly orange colored cloud, which they would have attributed to the setting sun. Another strange phenomenon that they began noticing as well was missing soil. On numerous occasions, Terry would see hovering lights in the sky above his property, and when he would investigate the next day, he would find 1-foot deep holes that were several feet across. And it's very unlikely, he said, that people had driven onto the property, dug all this dirt, and then hauled it away like in the dead of night. He would have heard that, he would have seen it, there would have been tire tracks, right? But there was nothing. There were no vehicles coming that he could actually track. There was nothing. And he would also discover circular impressions in the grass of where something had clearly landed and then taken off. So just like a word of warning, I am going to get into where the animals got hurt. But I mean, if you've heard of Skinwalker Ranch, I'm sure you knew that this was coming. But just for anyone who would appreciate it. So another disturbing occurrence on the ranch, unfortunately not uncommon, were cattle mutilations. And this disturbing phenomenon has been occurring around Skinwalker Ranch for decades, like with the earliest reportings in the 1960s, but it's likely thought that they were happening well before then. One of the first incidents happened one day after a snowstorm. Terry went out to check on his cows and he realized that one of them was missing. He quickly found her tracks and he followed them out into an open field. And here, just like the wolf, her tracks ended with no explanation. Like there were no predator or other animal tracks alongside them, anywhere around them. The cow was nowhere to be seen and her tracks just stopped. She was never found again, and it was like she had literally disappeared upwards. There was nowhere else for her to have gone. In another incident in 1995, Terry and his son were helping their cattle move through a muddy field after an intense rainstorm. They noticed that a calf had wandered off in the wrong direction, and then an adult cow was having difficulty walking up a muddy hill. They first prioritized retrieving the calf, knowing its vulnerability, and upon returning to assist the adult cow, they found that it had died. But it had literally only been a couple of minutes that they had been gone. The poor cow had been completely drained of blood, and its tongue and other body parts had been cut off with such precision that it looked like a surgeon had done it. This incident left the Shermans deeply disturbed, as the cow had been completely fine before they left to help the calf. These cattle mutilations would only continue, with several more having all of the blood drained out of them and having parts of them surgically removed. Terry believed that a pattern was also emerging with these, because with every cow that he would find, it would be preceded by large yellow lights in the sky on the previous night. Even stranger, the cow carcasses seemed to decay at a much slower rate than they should have. And on one occasion, he found a brown gel-like substance surrounding one of them, and he attempted to take a sample of it, but when he returned with a container to do so, the substance had evaporated. Oh my goodness. So the Shermans also began observing small glass-like orbs, and these were not just like mere balls of light or ball lightning. It was not that. These were solid appearing spheres that would actually approach them and their animals closely. One early encounter involved two of their horses. They witnessed a blue pulsating orb, which was roughly the size of a baseball. The strange ball, illuminated by a pulsing blue light, was made of a transparent glass-like material. And intriguingly, there was a blue bubbling liquid inside of it, and it made this crackling sound which was similar to electricity. And they watched as this ball descended, and it hovered near their horses' heads, where the two horses were calmly grazing in a field. And the animals immediately displayed a clear discomfort and irritation from this thing. And concerned for their horses, Terry quickly approached, prompting the orb to abruptly ascend towards him and Gwen, where it then hovered about 20 feet directly above their heads. The couple felt a distinct impression that the orb was functioning as some sort of camera, and they believed that it had been observing the horses and it was now doing the same to them. The scariest part for me, anyway, is they said that they felt this deep, guttural feeling of fear and dread as this strange glass ball seemed to stare at them. And they said it was more than just normal fear. Like they said, it was almost like this thing was putting a fake emotion into their body. It was very weird and very eerie. Gwen attempted to illuminate the orb with her flashlight, but it swiftly accelerated away, vanishing over the mountains. Returning home after that encounter, they noticed that the ball of light was hovering outside of their windows. This time though, it flew around their house and it emitted an even brighter blue light. And in addition, their indoor and outdoor lights began to flicker and dim, almost in sync with this blue light. They rushed outside to investigate, but they found that the orb had already shot off hundreds of feet away onto their property, where it disappeared yet again. So the blue orbs became a pretty recurring phenomenon on the ranch, sometimes changing color to red, yellow, or orange, but always giving off the same feeling that they were watching the ranch and the family. They would typically hover at a distance, seemingly observing the Shermans and their animals. And tragically, Terry's dog suffered a fatal encounter with one of them. This next part was pretty hard for me to read about, and it's hard to talk about because it involves dogs. But it's a big part of the story, so I'm going to keep going. I'm just going to let people know that there's dogs involved. So one evening, while sitting outside with his dogs, 3 of them, Terry witnessed another orb appear in a nearby field. And that night, the dogs excitedly chased after it, and instead of evading them like it would normally or like they would normally do, the orb descended, getting really close to them, and the dogs jumped at it. They were barking, they were attempting to grab onto it, and it seemed like it was almost being playful with them, like taunting them. It would move down just where they could almost bite it, and then it would go back up. It then descended all the way to the ground though, and it rapidly moved along the grass and all the way into the woods, like almost like a laser pointer. And the dogs chased after it, disappearing into the trees. Terry then heard what he said were distressing sounds, and he feared the worst. Like, he knew something bad had happened. But given the previous encounters with the giant wolf and the darkness of the night at the time, he was just too afraid to venture into the woods. And the next morning, he discovered the remains of his dogs, which had been reduced to 3 piles of ashes on the forest floor. And the scariest part about that was surrounding the 3 circles, everything was completely unburnt. Like, the grass was still green and growing. It was just perfect, 3 perfect circles. The Shermans were like absolutely distraught over their dogs, and they were facing mounting frustration and uncertainty on how to proceed. And this is where they decided to publicly disclose their experiences at the ranch. Their story first appeared in a 1996 article in the Desert Sun, which was a local newspaper. And this brought the ranch to the attention of a man named Robert Bigelow, who was a billionaire real estate tycoon, hotel chain owner, and somebody with a very keen interest in the paranormal. Hi, buddy. You okay? Sorry you can't really see them much today. They're sleepy. Bigelow, the founder of the National Institute for Discovery Science, called NIDS, which was a research organization dedicated to investigating unexplained phenomena, was captivated by the Sherman's story. He had long sought a suitable location for a paranormal research base within the US, and recognizing the potential of this ranch, he made an offer to purchase it from the Shermans, and they accepted in 1996, selling the property for less than they had paid for it, but happy to be finally leaving. Shortly after going public with their story, the Shermans experienced a lot of attention, some of whom wanted to investigate the paranormal activity there. So this was like right before they moved out. But yeah, they would just have people showing up who were interested in doing like ghost investigations and stuff. And Terry turned most of them away, but on a couple of occasions he allowed some of them to stay. He said that the ones who were just very like eccentric and just genuinely curious, he allowed them to come onto the property. And on one occasion, a man showed up at their door one afternoon, and he simply asked if he could go and sit in one of their fields and just meditate. And Terry didn't really see the harm in this, so he allowed him to do it. The man went out into a pasture near the woods. He sat down and he began to meditate, and he fell into a deep state of relaxation where he wasn't really aware of what was going on around him, I guess. Terry and the family were watching from a window when they suddenly see some sort of strange disturbance emerging from the woods. And they explained it as like a very large, pixelated, blurry being that came out of the trees. And it was like camouflaged. It sprinted towards the man, stopping abruptly before him, and then emitted a terrifying roar. The startled man regained consciousness. He saw and heard this camouflage being in front of him, and then before he could even process what was happening, it suddenly retreated back into the woods. And for anybody who knows the original Predator movie with Arnold, both Terry and his son likened this pixelated looking figure to the Predator's camouflage ability. and it's thought that if that particular being was perhaps a skinwalker, perhaps the man's meditating is what actually saved his life. Yay, you guys get to see him a little bit more now. No one got to see you that whole time because your little squishy face was squished into the blanket. You're so cute. You're such a good boy. Yeah, you too, buddy. You too. Love you. So after selling the ranch to Bigelow, Terry actually offered to work for him and for the NIDS team as a ranch hand. And I think it's important to note here that the Shermans had other offers for the property, but they actually turned them all down. They didn't want anybody else to go through what they had, and they certainly did not want anybody getting hurt. But hearing that Bigelow wanted to study the activity there, they agreed to sell it to him, which is, I think it gives credibility to their story because they lost money. I don't know. So knowing that he was a valuable asset because of how well he knew the land, they obviously accepted his offer to work with them. So just before Bigelow took ownership, on Terry and Gwen's last night in the ranch house, a very unsettling event occurred. So both Terry and Gwen believed that they experienced an alien abduction, on themselves. After a long day of herding cattle, they showered and then they went to bed. And that's important because their clothing was clean, their bed was clean when they got in. Upon waking, they discovered that their clean sheets were stained with blood, and they both had inexplicable scoop-shaped wounds on their thumbs. These wounds are apparently a common occurrence among alleged abduction victims, often attributed to the extraction of DNA by aliens. I have no idea why. Just for the sake of argument, if that's real, why would they take a scoop out of your thumb of all the places? I hate it. I hate it so much. So the NIDS team comprised of a group of people who were looking to do real, proper scientific investigations on this property. They were looking to debunk things and find reasonable explanations. And this team obviously had more people on it, but some of the key researchers included people with degrees in physics, veterinary science, and astronomy, as well as others. And included Hal Puthoff, physicist and parapsychologist, Jacques Vallée, astronomer and ufologist, John Mack, Harvard psychiatrist, and George Knapp, an American journalist whose work has focused on the paranormal, particularly UFOs. The head of the team for the ranch was Dr. Colm A. Kelleher, a scientist with a PhD in biochemistry. So the NIDS team, they began their investigations in September of 1996, implementing extensive security measures, including a ton of cameras and an observation center, and right away they began experiencing really strange phenomena. One of the first events that they all witnessed was a very bright light in the sky that would hover, slowly descend down, and then it would come back up. And it doesn't sound very interesting, but none of the experts could rule out what that light was. Also, in the winter of that year, more cattle mutilations occurred. The team would find 2 dead cows within close proximity, their carcasses inexplicably positioned beneath a fence, and predators, for some weird reason, were not touching them. They weren't going anywhere near them. A subsequent incident involved a young cow discovered near the observation center with severe injuries to its eyes and ears. And importantly, that happened near the observation center where there were a ton of cameras. And one of the injuries included a very weird hole in the center of its left eye. Otherwise, the cow was untouched. There were no other injuries on its body, and there were no traces of blood anywhere. And they found that the majority of attacks like this would usually occur during snowstorms or other severe weather, leaving the team to wonder if something was intentionally attacking the cows at these times so as to not be seen. So there was no visibility for the cameras. Now, 2 veterinarians examined the cow with the eye injury, and strangely, they reached 2 completely different conclusions. One of them deemed the injuries unprecedented, unlike any that they had ever encountered previously, and attributed them to an unknown assailant. The other, however, suspected a large feline predator or a coyote. In another disturbing incident, the Shermans went into a pasture one day not far from the house, and they tagged a calf who weighed about 80 pounds. Now, this calf was completely healthy, and it was just hanging out with its mother on this sunny, beautiful day. Like, everything was normal. It was a very calm morning, but they did notice a strong musky odor in the air that should not have been there. The couple take the calf, and then they went about 900 yards into the same field to tag another one. They walked like in a straight line. They were accompanied by their dog, and they were only gone for about 30 minutes. And it's important to take note that they had a clear view of the straight line back to the calf that they had just tagged. Suddenly, the dog starts freaking out, growling, and looking back towards where they had tagged the first calf. Then the dog ran in the opposite direction, and it never came back. They look back and they can see that the mother cow is pacing back and forth. Like, she is absolutely panicked. She's limping, and they can tell that something is very, very wrong. So they rush back and they find that the poor calf has been killed. And this was perhaps like the most, it was the most horrific one yet. This poor calf was lying belly up. All of its internal body cavity was gone. Like, all of the muscle was gone. One of the ears had been cleanly sliced off, and one of the femurs had been ripped out of the joint, and that bone was completely clean. And there are no predators or animals in the area that could have done something like that, like cleanly ripped a bone out of its joint like that. The animal had been completely drained of blood, and unlike typical predator attacks, there were no signs of tearing, ragged wounds, or blood in the surrounding area. Like, there was literally no blood, none on the animal, none under the animal, or anywhere in the surrounding field. The NIDS team, including a veterinarian, conducted a microscopic examination of the incisions, confirming their clean and precise nature. An animal had not done this. And they said we strongly believe that there was an involvement of an entity capable of performing intricate surgical procedures. Samples of the calf were sent to 3 independent pathology labs after that, and each of these labs confirmed that this had been done with a sharp metallic object, likely a scalpel. They then brought a professional tracker in to scour the area to look for animal, human, or vehicle tracks, and they found absolutely nothing. And this led the team to conclude that not only did something perform this attack with like a surgical knowledge, but it had to have happened elsewhere, and then the animal was simply brought back afterwards. Yeah, those poor cows. And if you're wondering like why the cows were being tagged and stuff after the farm was sold, it was because the Shermans kept their cows there for a short time after they sold the property, so they were still working with their cows. In the summer of 1997, 2 NIDS researchers witnessed a phenomenon similar to Terry's claims of portals and doorways opening up out of thin air. In the early morning hours, while observing the property from a research vehicle, they noticed a cluster of bright, swirling yellow lights off in the distance. And I believe it was like beneath a rock, like a mountain almost. They quickly set up a tripod and a camera to capture this event. And one of the researchers, using night vision binoculars, observed the lights forming into a circular doorway. Just stick with me. He then witnessed a large humanoid figure, estimated to be 400 pounds or more, emerge from this illuminated portal before the doorway abruptly collapsed and the lights vanished. It only opened long enough for this creature to step through and immediately closed once it did. Now, interestingly, this apparently occurred in an area where one of the team members had been meditating. After hearing the story about the man who had meditated on their property and then encountered the pixelated beast, the team believed that meditating could potentially trigger paranormal events. After the yellow light disappeared, the men walked to the area where it had been, and they noticed a strong sulfuric smell, and their radiation detectors picked up alpha, gamma, and beta ray radiation. On another occasion, during a pursuit of a purported Bigfoot creature on the property, the way I said that, the NIDS team witnessed another anomalous event. They had cornered this creature at the base of a hill when it suddenly ascended the steep slope. Out of nowhere, an orange streak of light appeared, just like Terry had described, followed by the opening of a tunnel-like portal. This creature then leapt into this inexplicable portal, vanishing before the eyes of the astonished team. And that was not the first time that the team witnessed like a giant animal like that either. On another night, the team could hear their team dogs barking and reacting viciously to something on the property. They quickly drove to where the dogs were, and they observed what they said was a giant animal with yellow glowing eyes in a tree above them. Terry estimated this animal to be at least 400 pounds. He shot at it, and he was certain that he had hit it and it had fallen to the ground. But when the team went to go and find it, it had disappeared. They spotted it a second time in the woods. Terry shot again, this time from point blank range, but found nothing. Whatever he had shot at had once again disappeared. Now the team searched the area for hours, only to find 2 oval-shaped tracks, each about 20 feet away from one another. And the tracks showed that the animal had only 2 claws, each about 6 inches long. Dr. Kelleher's best guess was some sort of huge bird of prey, but the tracks were never identified. Sounds like a skinwalker to me. In the summer of 1998, the team witnessed yet again another unexplainable event. Terry discovered that several of the ranch's surveillance cameras had mysteriously shut off. Upon inspection, he found that 3 of these cameras had their wiring completely severed. Now these cameras, the creepy part, is that they were mounted on 15-foot poles with the wiring securely encased in thick PVC piping. And this damage indicated deliberate sabotage, as all 3 cameras were affected. While a single incident might have been attributed to an animal, the methodical nature of this attack suggested a more intelligent force. Intriguingly, nearby cameras remained operational, including one with a direct view of the damaged ones. However, the footage revealed no sign of intruders. It revealed absolutely nothing. Digital enhancement of that footage revealed one crucial detail though. The power supply to each of those damaged cameras had simultaneously ceased at 8:30 p.m. And this precise timing, coupled with the inexplicable nature of the damage, led the team to speculate about the involvement of an unseen, possibly even invisible entity having destroyed them. It wouldn't be the first mention of some sort of invisible entity on the property. So, one of the weirdest events was when 4 cows disappeared and they were found inside of a small shed. So as I mentioned, even though Terry and Gwen had moved, for the time being, their cows and their bulls were still kept on the ranch. They drove to the ranch one night and they drove by the enclosure that held their 4 prized bulls. Now, the bulls were fine. The enclosure was sealed. Everything was good. 45 minutes later, they drive by the pen again and the bulls are gone. They freak out, but they immediately get out to start looking for them, and Terry finds these massive animals inside of a small shed. And he said that they were all huddled together in one corner, and it was like they were in some sort of weird trance. Like, they weren't moving, they weren't upset, they weren't trying to get out, nothing. It didn't make sense how these huge bulls had calmly walked into the shed on their own, but they had gotten in there. And when Terry made a loud noise to let Gwen know that he had found them, I should mention the door was closed. So they walk into a shed and they close the door. When Terry made a noise to let Gwen know that he had found them, it was this noise that almost like broke the trance that they were in, and the bulls went absolutely crazy. Like, they had just snapped out of it and realized where they were. They start destroying the inside of the shed, knocking the metal door open and getting out. And when the NIDS team arrived, the only abnormal thing that they could find was that the metal bars on the bull's enclosure had somehow become magnetized for no apparent reason. And within 48 hours, the magnetization had disappeared. The NIDS investigation at Skinwalker Ranch began in 1996 and it ended in 2004. The most intense phenomena occurred in 1997, and in 1999 began to dramatically decrease, with the team reporting fewer incidents every year. The team eventually disbanded in 2004. In 2016, Robert Bigelow sold the property to Brandon Fugel, a founder of Adamantium Real Estate, but interestingly wanted permission for research to continue at the ranch. And in 2020, the well-known Secret of Skinwalker Ranch TV show launched, with Brandon Fugel himself being an executive producer on the show. Like the NIDS team, this show focused on real scientific investigations, which included ground-penetrating radar, electromagnetic field detectors, and drone surveillance to gather data and attempt to explain the paranormal events. In 2005, NIDS team Colm Kelleher and George Knapp released a book on their experiences and investigations about their time at Skinwalker Ranch. This book was highly controversial for a number of reasons. Critics argue that the book sensationalized the events at the ranch, emphasizing the more bizarre and frightening occurrences. But, I get that that's a critique, but I mean, wouldn't any paranormal investigation do that? Of course you're going to sensationalize the scary parts. That's kind of the whole point, isn't it? Critics also say that the book lacked any concrete evidence, and the investigations conducted at the ranch, while intriguing, often failed to provide definitive explanations for the phenomena. Interestingly, though, the authors admit this in the book, talking about their frustrations with the lack of any hard evidence. They witnessed paranormal events, and they tried their hardest to capture evidence of them. But for some mysterious reason, every time they tried, something would go wrong. One of the biggest issues with the book is that the authors did not actually interview Terry Sherman or his family. And this is concerning, given the fact that the book covered so much of the family's supposed experiences at the ranch. Terry Sherman himself admitted that some of the stories from the book, the bulletproof wolf, for example, were, quote, not entirely accurate, unquote. Terry said that the wolf story was based on hearsay, but interestingly, he would not elaborate or provide an accurate account of what actually happened. However, luckily for us paranormal enthusiasts, Terry did confirm that several of his most infamous stories on the ranch were indeed true. He said that he did witness the strange orbs, the flying lights, cattle disappearances and mutilations did very much happen. The orange portals through which they could see a separate sky, that was very true. The story about the blue orb and his dogs was very sad, but true. And the story about his 4 bulls being hypnotized in a shed was also true. Another critique just of the paranormal activity on Skinwalker Ranch itself is the question of why the previous owners, the Myers, Why did they not experience any paranormal events, right? But it turns out actually that they may have. They just may never have gotten a chance to share it publicly because the ranch wasn't famous when they owned it. According to neighbors and other people who knew them, the Myers had experienced some strange stuff. They themselves witnessed cattle mutilations. They would have strange knocking on their door in the middle of the night, and when they would open it, nobody would be there, which I have heard from sources that that is apparently a trait of skinwalkers. They will knock on your door and try to get you to come out, which just sends shivers down my spine. The Myers also experienced UFO sightings on their land, and even a ranch worker who worked for them claimed to have been abducted there. Garth Myers, however, the brother, he refuted these claims, saying that nothing bizarre or paranormal ever occurred there. But my little critique of that is that he didn't live there. So, does he truly know? I don't know. But he also did say that the stories about the house being heavily fortified with locks and chains and stuff, he said that that was completely over-exaggerated. He didn't say it wasn't true, though. He just said it was over-exaggerated, which I take as it was true. So that is it for this deep dive into Skinwalker Ranch. I know that there is not a ton of hard evidence, and a lot of the stories are a bit out there, but that is what makes this story so fascinating, in my opinion. Pugs Tea and the Paranormal. My channel, it's not going to be about like debunking or proving anything. There's lots of paranormal channels out there who their only aim is to dissect these stories, dissect every little detail, and debunk anything that they can. That's not going to be my channel. This is just about exploring the spooky side of our world and diving into the weird and wonderful world of the paranormal. I don't know. So whether you believe in skinwalkers or not, I hope you enjoyed the video, and yeah, it would mean a lot if you could like it, if you could subscribe, come along on the journey with me while we go over these cases just for fun. I definitely do want to research like the best sources that I can, but yeah, it's just for fun. I love this kind of stuff. I love being freaked out. I love being scared. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for being here. Let me know in the comments what you think about Skinwalker Ranch. Maybe you even have your own stories about it if you live in the area. Like, do you think it's truly haunted? Do you think it's truly cursed? Or is it all just one big hoax? Let me know. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Right, Dex? Foodie, you awake? Dexter? 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 Bueller? Bueller? No, he's out. Good night, everyone.